Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your hosts, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino. I'm here with our other host, Mr. Joe LaVacca, and it is a special episode-ish because coming on to this episode, Joe, you are now in your 40th decade of life.
Yes. So the listeners can expect a lot more wisdom, a lot more calm, a lot more patience than I was even delivering before, Joe. So this is going to be an exciting time for me, for you, for them. I am looking forward to it. Thank you for everyone who had reached out and sent some messages on social media. It really did mean a lot to me. And it never goes unnoticed that whenever my birthday comes around, I'll shoot a birthday message to people here and there. But it was really nice to hear from a few people and be kind of in the back of people's mind. And I'm always like, wow, that was nice. So I do actually look forward to my birthday every year for that reason. As I joked with Joe offline, 40 was sort of like a really good movie trailer where it was all this build up and anticipation. Then you kind of get to the theater and you watch it and you're like, oh, that was it? It's over? All right, I guess I'll just go to work. Guess I'll just go about my normal routine. And so it wasn't a letdown. It is exciting, but I feel good and I'm ready to be back and looking forward to the rest of the summer with you and our listeners. So let's hit it, man. What are we talking about today?
Well, we will be talking about some back facts. So we'll talk a little bit about lower back pain, some facts around it, and I will let you intro us into the idea of it, and we'll dive in.
All right, awesome. This came up this week. I had the pleasure of teaching or leading a little discussion, I should say, at a gym in New York City called Nimble Fitness. They're a really fantastic group of guys. I probably go in there once a year and we just talk and riff on just different topics. And one of the ideas that we came up with this time around was, how can our personal trainers really help out this whole idea of pain, particularly low back pain? Because it is the most common thing that I think most human beings, regardless of if you're 40 or 50 or young, quote unquote, you have probably dealt with. And that's what the research says, is that low back pain at one point or another is going to be experienced by almost everyone. And Joe, right now, this is estimated, of course. Can you think of how many people are estimated to be having a low back pain episode or complaint right now at the given moment?
I'm going to ballpark it to be 1 million.
540 million at any one time. So this is something that creates a community. You are not alone, even though it might feel that way. And I mentioned this in the gym the other day. Now, my most favorite fact about low back pain is most people recover quickly. It doesn't seem that way because it is so common, and we can all shake our heads at remembering what it was like when our back went out, or remembering what it's like to have back pain bending over and getting up out of bed and things like that. But from a true statistical sense of maybe how pain is affecting your lifestyle, do you have to modify workouts? A lot of those windows can be anywhere between 2 to, let's say, 10 or 12 weeks. My second favorite fact is that even though you might get treatment for it, that window doesn't really seem to shift all that much. And I think this is a really important point on where we're going to take the episode, because so many people have pain. This window typically clears up anywhere between maybe like 2 weeks and 10 weeks, give or take a few days in either direction. But during that time, if you get care, you're going to be told what caused your back pain. And I think this is where you start getting treatment for your weak core. You start getting treatment for stress management or breathing. You start getting treatment for some sort of corrective exercise or hip opener. And then lo and behold, in 4 weeks, your pain gets better. So, what are you likely to think? I need more core work. I need more hip work. I need more breath work. And that is going to be the reason why I can prevent this pain from returning. But here's the other fun fact, Joe. I'm going to throw it at you because I think we've talked about it before. How many cases of low back pain are actually non-specific? And we're looking for a percentage here.
I think we said like 80% or something like that. I can't even remember the
90
numbers.
to 99%, brother. So we have the most common experience or
Mhm.
symptom in the entire world coming to us that's going to typically resolve on its own for most people in 2 to, let's say, 12 weeks. And almost 90+% of the time, you or I wouldn't actually be able to specifically label with certainty where the pain is coming from. So I think I'm going to just pause right there. And you being reminded of a couple of these things, or
Mhm.
maybe hearing some of these numbers, do you think that this contributes to the sort of like fear mongering and lack of understanding that we're seeing from clients, especially on the internet and the people that you work with?
Yes, I do. I think if you have pain and you go see somebody whose job is to try to figure out what's going on, well, you're going to get some sort of answer. One of the things I hear a lot is, I mean, there's a lot of people who come in who nothing's wrong with them MRIs, this PT or this Cairo said, like there's nothing like that they can specifically find, but they think it's this. And then it's usually related again, like what you said, like it's the core, it's the glutes not firing, whatever it is. And I think if you cannot say with certainty, and this even goes back to our last episode of, or maybe at this point it'll be 2 episodes back, of do we need to know exactly where your pain is coming from to help you? Well, sometimes that's not the answer, right? There is no real specific cause. So we would then need to figure out, okay, well, what's just happening from a mood perspective? What is being irritated? Is it trending in the right direction? What are your goals and what are you trying to accomplish? And sometimes maybe it is a little bit of time and just putting a little bit of good inputs into the body. And maybe we need to be a little bit more specific, especially if it's for those people who have been dealing with pain for much longer than 2 to 12 weeks, right? But I think the language that for sure, the way that we speak to our clients and the language that we use for sure can create like an identity for somebody. And maybe for the person who's only had back pain for the first time and it lasted for 4 weeks, it's probably really not going to cause too much of a problem unless it's becoming a recurring problem and they've heard the same thing over and over again. But for the people who have been in pain for a long time, to just blame it on this, and especially if they've tried all these other things in the past before, well, now they're going to think like nothing's going to work for me. I think it's going to set them up for a harder time because they're not going to be able to have good expectations for what's going to happen when you don't have good answers or they're being told the same thing number of times with no changes to the outcome.
Right. And then when you're being told something specific, and then all of a sudden, like you're saying, like you get better. Well, if my thought process was my core was weak, I shouldn't lift heavy then until I've strengthened my core to a good enough point. Or maybe I just shouldn't lift heavy, or maybe I shouldn't do barbell exercises or dumbbell exercises or kettlebell exercises. And you know what? That could actually be the case for certain people. I don't believe that there is a specific exercise or modality that you have to do. I think big picture wise, if you're building muscle mass, if you're building bone density, if you're managing your weight, I don't care how you do it, with a treadmill and 2 pairs of sneakers, with a pool, with a kettlebell, with resistance bands. And, I think we've talked about that here. It's more about the keeping the goals rather than what specific process is the best way to do that. Cause I think that'll be really individual. The things that I think are worth looking at, if you and I on average are going to have a pretty hard time pinpointing down to it being a facet joint, a specific muscle, a joint, maybe with some certainty we can talk about disc pain, but that's a kind of a separate beast, so we can maybe push that one aside. This is more of the back pain that's staying above your knee, the back pain that's on one side, the back pain that's kind of feels like it's in your hip, or, that little spot that you press your thumb into. I think these are the more common patterns we're talking about. But I think the thing that gets swept under the rug a little bit is kind of filtering the people who have high pain intensity. So who are reporting maybe 7, 8s, and 9s, or maybe even higher, right? These people who are saying, help me, this is really serious. People who are demonstrating some psychological stress. Now, I read recently, and this is my new filter question for stress, is your stress creating conflict? Is your stress creating isolation? Or is your stress creating a loss of identity? If one of those three are met, then yes, I do think your body can be responding unfavorably to that experience. If you're like, well, I'm really stressed out because I have to get my kids to school in the morning. Oh, I'm really stressed out because, I read about something that, I read about Brian Johnson's gastric intestinal disease, and it's really worrying me because I took all of his pills and everything else. Like all of these just general worries about work and relationships and whatever, we all have them. I can't do anything about those. And guess what? If you didn't have them, that's also a stress. So if you didn't have a boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, kids, that's a stress. If you didn't have a job, that's a stress, right? But all of them are different. So I filter it now with those three things. And actually, since I've been asking that question, it's been a lot more insightful with clients, because I asked one person the other day who was feeling really fatigued and she has fibromyalgia. And I asked her that question specifically, and she was like, no, nothing like that. I just think it's the heat. Perfect. So we're able to pace ourselves at the gym, come up with strategies at home. I asked a client that this morning who I was working with, and he paused, got a little teary eyed, and said, yes, I feel completely isolated. And then that just put us into a direction of, hey, you know what? Well, there's probably not going to be too many exercises that are going to help you with isolation, short of leaving your laptop at home this week, going to see some friends, calling up a family member because he's from France, calling up some family members from back home and just talking about the World Cup or whatever. So I'm going to pause again. This idea of stress being the culprit for pain. What are your thoughts on that? Do you like this like kind of screening bucket of more specificity on how it's impacting the person?
I do. I think that's a important and probably underlooked thing, and probably something I don't necessarily screen for enough. I think throughout my conversations and just have it like with the nature of how in depth I get, like sometimes those things surface, but I think there's also times where I wonder, like based on how they're presenting or when things reflare up or something like that, like trying to find, sometimes there are thoughts in my mind, like I wonder if there's more of a stressful situation going on in their life that is, unforeseen by me. And I think screening that out is a very smart thing, because in cases of people being, I mean, we talked about it we were just talking about the bigger bucket episode that we did. It was like episode 7 or 8, where, pain is not just what is on your MRIs or your imaging or like one specific tissue, right? It is a multifactorial thing where all sorts of our body just sees stress as stress. It doesn't really matter if it's physical or emotional or whatever else. So if there's just so much stress coming into the system that's always overflowing the bucket, well, if there is a way to decrease someone's stress, I don't know if that's always what we can do, right? But maybe we can point them in the right direction to maybe help that process. We can find ways to help them recover better, right? Like that will also help the process of helping increase the size of their bucket to tolerate more stress. If we can slowly get them to move more and get stronger and things like that, where their body can tolerate more stress, it tells us we're building a bigger bucket. So I think that is a very smart way to go about things, especially for people who have been dealing with pain for a long time. Or I think I've talked about the story about an old personal training client of mine who we worked together for a long time, was moving really good, started to have pain one day, and like his movement reverted back to normal. And every time that happened, it always correlated with significant stress at work for him. Right. So it was like that was the first time, and that was before I even knew all this stuff, that I started to even see the pattern of how stress in someone's life can just like really impact how they move, how they feel, pain, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you see it, it's almost kind of hard to unsee it, or maybe not think, oh, is this going to be something that affects every single person? Right. And I think I've fallen into that trap of spending too much time there. Like, Are you sure that you don't have any stress at home? Are you sure that you like your job? Are you sure that you love your kids? Right. And I think when you kind of overemphasize those ideas, that's where I think people feel even like a little bit more stuck, right? Because it's not practical to think, well, I'm going to get rid of all your stress. It's just impossible. Exercise is stress. So if I think that stress is causing your pain, why would I add to your stress list to help you cope with it? If I think that you're in a vulnerable state and you might need, let's say, soothing or sparing techniques over stressing techniques, then why wouldn't we give you that? And then vice versa. Well, when people just say no, I just move on now. Well, you're the expert in your life. I'm asking you a question. If you say no, great, cool, let's move on. In the event I pick up on something or we pick up on something on visit 3, 4, 5, 6, when you actually get to know somebody, maybe you pick up on an inflection. Maybe you pick up on a sort of facial expression or pause or, just their demeanor coming off the elevator or coming into your clinic or showing up on Zoom. But I think it takes a little bit of time to know somebody. So that first question, if you feel stressed, okay, cool. Let me know. Let's talk about it. What kind of stress? Is it those ones that, like I'm saying now, are making you feel conflicted, isolated, or maybe kind of questioning yourself a little bit? And cool. Do you have someone to manage that with, or do you want to talk about some strategies together? And I think I keep offering those branches, right? Because I tell people a lot of the times with this behavioral stuff, I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not a licensed like behavioral health specialist, right? So I can give you some tactics. Do those seem appealing? No. Okay, great. Well, if this keeps recurring, I'm going to suggest that you go see somebody that can give you even more tactics than the ones that I know of. So I think maybe that's been a little deviation for me as well. But we got 10 facts. I don't want to turn this too much into a stress conversation because I think people are like, well, where are the facts? And we got 10 of these, buddy. And I want to, we'll go one by one. You want to take number one and we can comment on it if we like and
I
kind of
will.
just keep moving through this list?
Yeah, I think this is good, especially for people with. I feel like, and maybe it's just social media, but I feel like the spine in itself is something that is perceived as it's so fragile, right? And even from a provider standpoint, how we talk about or how they talk about how much we can load it, only neutral, fear of flexion, fear of extension, fear of rotation, fear of just movement in general, right? So I kind of like this one here. And this is actually probably ties into a few of these on this list. But the first one here is persistent pain, back pain can be scary, but is rarely dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And I like this one because, and the note here is it really is, it can be distressing, it can be disabling, but it's not life threatening, and it will, you're not going to end up in a wheelchair as a result, right? So I think it is good. I think we talked about, how many people in the world have pain, right? And
Yep.
I think the statistic is at some point, and someone like 80% of people at one point in their life is going to have lower back pain at some point or another. So I think it comes down to is like pain is a normal experience, right? We've talked about this a number of times. Yes, especially if you've been dealing with it for a long time, maybe you don't have the answers, that it can become a stressful thing. You're not sure if you're going to get better. But I think reframing it this way, like, hey, if you can still do the things that you want to, maybe you have to reserve or you have to take some rest recovery. You have to think about, okay, maybe I can't like garden on this day and then work out the next day and then go play golf on the next day, right? Like maybe you have to like plan your weeks. I hear people talk about that. I used to have to do that myself, kind of plan how I'm structuring all my activities. But I think if we kind of reframing it like, okay, pain is normal. It's not always dangerous, maybe impacting my life, and then trying to figure out how we navigate it from there.
Amen, brother. Number two is a good one for me. Getting older is not a cause of back pain. So, yes, we have a lot of common sayings. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
getting old, or this is what happens when you turn 40, 50, 60. Fortunately, the evidence doesn't necessarily always support that. So, I think hanging on to just you getting older or age as being a little bit of a crutch for your pain, we can probably.
Yeah, I
What do
agree.
we got for
The only thing I'll say there is, and I was thinking about this when I read it earlier, is that I think a lot of people, one reason why when we get older, we start to feel it is because there's just more time for repetitive stress to act in our bodies. So, if it's not going to happen when we're 15 or 20, usually around, it seems like late 20s, early 30s is when it tends to kind of pop up. But I would probably say that's more so going to be lifestyle related, how hard or little you've trained, the injuries that you've had in the past, how active you are or not active you are. All those things will kind of build up and present in a certain way. And we do know that there's going to just be an age-related decline. We see it with, power loss and strength loss over time. If you're not doing it right, there can be a pretty stark decrease over the course of our decades after we turn, once we, get past our third decade. So when we're Joe's age and forward. And, I think that also plays into, pain and movement, all these things also popping up over time. But I think those things are also, if you start to do things about them or you start to train a certain way, the same way we can prevent these strength and power losses from declining significantly over a course of our life. We can do the same thing with mobility, with pain, with all these other factors as well.
Yeah.
So
Heck yeah. All right. What
I'll
do you
leave
got for
that
number
there.
three?
Number three, persistent back pain is rarely associated with serious tissue damage. And I think we've hinted on that today a number of times. You can go, I've even had two people I've talked to this week, one for the neck, one for the back. Both have some numbness that's happening, but all their MRIs are clear. Nothing has popped up. No herniated discs, maybe some light disc degeneration, but nothing that doctors have said that correlate with their symptoms. So, this is that whole back and forth and talking about how pain can come in a number of different ways. But what you see in an MRI or an X-ray does not always match what you see or from a pain perspective or how someone's feeling. And that can go both ways, right? Two people with symptoms that are correlating what's happening on imaging. So what's happening here? How do we find an answer to that? And it could be the opposite way. You can have these things that pop up on the imaging, but no pain. And why is that for some people? So I think this just really starts to tell us that pain is a little bit more complicated and we need to look outside of just imaging and where specifically or what structures are being irritated to figure out how to help somebody.
Yeah, and this bleeds right into number four. And my comment kind of blends in with what you were just saying and with number four. So, number four, scans rarely show the cause of back pain. We were just kind of saying that before, that 90 to 99% of most back pain will be what we call non-specific, meaning that we cannot, with 100% accuracy tell you why you have pain or what's the main driver of your pain. Now, the one little thing that I might just sort of caveat here, that tissue healing occurs within 3 months and that scans can't show your cause of pain. Maybe if you are having leg pain more than back pain, and specifically leg pain that goes below the knee, leading to any sort of signs of weakness and numbness, that might be one of those things where, hey, we want to get a scan to better understand or make sure the nerve itself is okay and not getting suffocated or not getting damaged, but just becoming irritated. So that might be one of those like little things where, hey, a scan can tell us a lot. A scan might even give us options on monitoring your symptoms because we have a baseline. But a lot of your degeneration and stuff that you mentioned, it's going to happen in adolescence. That was the most interesting research I read at the end of last year, was like when you repeatedly scan people between the ages of like 19 and 30, like that's when most of the degeneration happens. It's not until they get 40, 50, 60 when they start to have like their first episode of pain potentially,
Right.
where they're like, oh my God, look at all this stuff. But you've been with that for maybe 10, 20, 30 years at this point from what we're finding out. So that would be the only little caveat I'd add to number three or four. But I love number five and I love the rest of them. So what do you
I
got for
do.
us
I
at number
think number
five?
five is probably a big one for a lot of people listening here, and I feel like I talk about this a lot, often with clients and stuff like that. But pain with exercise and movement doesn't mean that you're doing harm. And I will frame it around, like if you do have pain and we are working together and we're trying to get you out of pain, we do have to do a dance around pain to get you over the hump, right? I think avoidance of pain in movements is going to leave you stuck because you're not putting enough load into the tissue to make changes, to make your body say, okay, maybe I could tolerate this stimulus and I need to reassess, my pain gauge, right? So that we can, okay, I can set this bar higher now and you can do more before I'm going to stop this pain response. So that's kind of where I think I want to talk about, like you do need to experience some pain depending on how we're rehabbing and the scenario. It's not always, but I think we do need to, if you're always avoiding pain, I don't think you're going to really move the needle forward. So that's where I'm going to frame it. And if you want to frame it in a different way, go for it.
Yeah, no, I think that the stuff that I've read currently has some short-term favorability for experiencing pain with your movements and with your rehab and with your loading. Again, I think the caveat there is keeping it tolerable. Right. And I think
Correct.
there are some research articles in the works from podcasts that I've listened to this week, sort of trying to question or elaborate on this idea of how much pain should you have with rehab. Is more pain better? Is less pain better? And I think that's sort of where we're at this crossroads, right? Because we all can kind of agree that, hey, for tendons, you really need to load into pain. Maybe for rewiring your nervous system response, you want to push into pain and become almost desensitized to the
Mhm.
signal a little bit. But how much is too much? How little is too little? I think those are the questions that we still have to figure out. So right now, I think the best filter I offer clients is keep it tolerable and then monitor symptoms 12 or 24 hours later to see if there's any change in your daily function or behavior.
Exactly. I don't know if we're ever going to get like a this is the number, because I think
Probably not.
everyone responds differently and everyone's has more tolerance to pain or less tolerance to pain based on them. But I think the response afterwards is what I'm looking for. And I did have somebody I was working with a while back. We use this rule, no more than a 4, nothing that flares up 24, 48 hours later. And he would do his workouts, his shoulder pain, and he checked that box every single time. But what we started to see is that after doing that for like 3, 4 weeks, is that his overall pain started to increase.
Mhm.
So now we're talking about, okay, you're following these pain rules. Like there's nothing here that's a red flag, but now we're seeing your pain get a little bit worse. So then we had to have a conversation. Maybe these pain rules, we have to, come up with some exceptions here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to try to find entry points into all these exercises that's really not an irritator right now. Like, let's just see. And then all of a sudden, his pain came way down. We were able to start to load it more and more. And then we started to space out the stimuli a little bit more. And that's what was successful for that person. So again, I think, sure, we have these general rules. We need to experience a little bit of pain. We need to kind of push through some of the tissue so we can make some adaptations. But the responses on the other end let us know if we're moving in the right direction. Are we just staying the same? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And then based on that information, we figure out what we need to do from here. So I think we just need to take information from multiple points to make decisions versus saying is it's black and white. You have to experience pain or you don't experience pain or this or that.
Right. Right. I'm going to combine number 6 and number 7 because I think they're kind of a related conversation. Back pain is not caused by poor posture, and back pain is not caused by a weak core. Now, if you are listening as driving, I hope you're still on the road. If you are listening at home, I hope you haven't fallen off your chair. But yes, this is the case. We see very, very weak correlations to posture. A lot of these things come up with the idea of force on the spine. But force on the spine doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have more pain in those positions. It doesn't necessarily mean that those positions are bad. And when we actually just watch people lift, there does seem to be this kind of slightly flexed, stooping posture behavior that is actually more efficient for you to be lifting things because it prevents over guarding, it prevents over muscle contraction or energy usage. And I think this kind of goes into this idea of the weak core. Why do people kind of tolerate core exercises? Because they're isometrics, they're the same static position, and you're not moving. Why do people typically not do well with core exercises in pain? Well, because you're in pain. One of the
Mhm.
things for muscle to do, for pain to do to muscle in the presence of pain is inhibit it. So I think we're getting too many false positives when it comes to this idea of weak cores because pain inhibits muscle
Mhm.
production or force in an area. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to guard you. And I think you hit it on the head a few episodes back, or probably more than a few episodes back at this point, that just because a position is sensitive doesn't mean that that is a position that we need to avoid or that some opposite end of the spectrum or flexion, extension, or slouched or upright is then all of a sudden
Mhm.
ideal. So I think 6 and 7 is still ones I battle in the clinic regularly with clients, especially if
Mhm.
they've come from other providers or come off of watching Instagram videos on their way
Mhm.
in, but the literature just does not support those ideas.
Yeah, I think 8 falls very much into it, so we'll touch on it very quickly. But bags do not wear out with everyday loading and bending. Again, I think it comes down to how much you're doing. Obviously, with anything like repetitive strain over time can cause problems. It doesn't matter if it's sitting, if it's standing, if it's good posture, bad posture, if it's bending, if it's not bending, right? You can have issues with that stuff. But what also research shows is that if you do bending and loading of your spine, that it will also adapt favorably. So we can use that to our advantage to make a more robust human being and make sure that your spine is able to segment well enough to disperse forces. That's what its job is. It does a very, very good job at that. And typically, the people who have problems with loading and bending are the ones that over time they have lost the ability to segment their spine, disperse force. They are the ones who maybe have had pain a few times in the past and their core doesn't fire as well because they are dealing with some issues over time. They may have other things from other areas in the chain that are causing things to be loaded in a different way. So it's not necessarily the loading or the bending that's the problem. It's more so of the other factors that might play in, stresses, other lifestyle things that have led you up to that point. So I think we need to get away from blaming the movements, the weak cores, the postures, the bending itself, and trying to figure out, okay, what might be causing this? How can we build you up to the point where you can tolerate those things better? Because we're all like, if I sit on my computer 8 hours a day, I can't stay in one position. I'm going to end up with poor posture, quote unquote. If you're not watching some video, I'm doing air quotes. We need to be able to tolerate different stimuli. And the best thing that we've learned, even earlier on in our careers, and it's still true to this day, is movement variability. The more we explore things and the more we change our positions, the better things are going to be. And probably to me, in my opinion, more so than any of these positions when they become painful, that's less of the problem. To me, it's the loss of access of other positions that become more common. We always blame anterior pelvic tilt for all these things. It's the death sentence, but everyone has anterior pelvic tilt. So why do we still say that way? But the problem is what happens when people really struggle to get out of anterior pelvic tilt when they're doing things, right? They don't
Right.
have access to a
Right.
posterior tilt or a very hard time bringing their ribs down and creating like a more neutral position. Well, if you can't do that and you're always in these positions, to me, right, to us, it's obvious that, issues can happen down the line. So I think it's more the loss of movement over time that becomes the issue than the things that we just talked about.
Right. Right. For sure. And one thing I always give a little example to for clients is, well, if we need to limit everyday loading, moving, bending, how are your hands and fingers doing? How's your jaw doing?
Mhm.
How's your elbows doing? Do you think that those things are maybe getting the most motion between eating and talking and everything else all day long and writing and texting and
Mhm.
keyboarding? Yet you don't have any pain, degeneration, breakdown there that we know of, but we have to spare your back. Like, again, why is that? Make
Mhm.
sense of it. And that's always like a nice little exercise for people to do that maybe, okay, everyday things aren't breaking me down because I don't have pain anywhere else in my body and I'm not thinking about sparing those things. So maybe I'm just sensitive. Maybe this will pass, and it absolutely will. Which brings us to number 9. Pain flare ups do not mean you're damaging yourself or losing progress. Up to 89 of clients with low back pain experience a flare in their pain, particularly within the first 3 months of getting treated. And when you do not know this, when you are not armed with this information, both you and your provider might have a negative reaction because it was unexpected. But yet the data shows it's not unexpected. We know it's likely going to happen. So let's create, and I might have said this in the podcast before, a flump plan, a flare up management plan, a flare up management procedure, because we know it's likely to happen. So when it does, you message me. We have our soothing, safe exercises to go to. We have our graded exposure. We can cut back on volume. We can cut back on intensity, but we're not going to stop. We're not going to turn the dial off. We're just going to turn the dial down on the things that we do. And then guess what? We don't need maybe a whole 6-week reintegration, reprogression. Once the flare goes away, we'll build you right back up to where we were. Where was our starting point, or where did we end up? Right there. Bench pressing 100 pounds. Cool. That's what we're going to go to. Deadlifting 100 pounds. Cool. That's what we're going to go to. As long as you weren't completely unable to do anything for more than 3 or 4 weeks, I'm not anticipating that you're losing strength, losing too much power, losing too much aerobic fitness. We make a quick modification and then we keep you moving forward.
Perfect. And I'll just reframe that just one step further because we do know that the number one predictor of injury is having that injury. So if we're looking down the line for somebody and they experience a flare up, it's normal. And I think that it shouldn't be necessarily, I mean, sure, it could be, you can be frustrated around it. You can be disappointed. You can be, a little scared about it. I always tell people, feel your feelings around it because I think they're valid. But it doesn't mean that you've damaged yourself. You've really set yourself back. I think it's more of like these things happen. And typically what I've seen with people who I've worked with in the past, when these flare-ups happen down the line, they recovery times are shorter. Like those are all
Mhm.
still really good signs that like all the work you've put in the past is still helping. And you just may need to, use your plan right at that moment to get yourself over the hump and you get right back into things. I mean, because flare-ups happen, right? And we've talked about it here, right? Like they're all, I think, red flag triggers, like bowel and bladder, if you're having issues with that, if you have like significant motor loss, like all of a sudden like drop foot, things
Mhm.
within that nature that say, okay, like night pain that doesn't go away no matter how you move. Like those are things you need to go see your doctor right away. Like those are the ones that are more dangerous from a red flag perspective. But if you're not having those things, it's very likely not dangerous. And we need to, you can figure out how to right the ship, whether that's by yourself or with your PT, Cairo, one of us, however that looks like for that person.
Exactly. Feel your feelings might be the most Italian thing you've ever said on the podcast show.
There you go. I got, they come out every now and again.
Oh man. All right, take us home. What's number 10?
Number 10, injections, surgeries, and strong drugs usually are not a cure. My perspective on them is they are the thing that helps us get over the road bump. If someone's having a really hard time getting over the pain hump with movement in general, sometimes these things can be the thing that get us over that hump so we can actually get you moving and get, stronger and do all the things that we need to do from a rehab and movement perspective and even a strength and fitness perspective that you weren't able to do before. So my experience of talking to people and even with someone who I talked with recently, I kind of have a feeling that he was thinking that like once if these injections work, I'm going to be good going forward. And sure, you might be, but I think that's also the opportunity where you can now really do the heavy hitting work that you wanted to do previously to get yourself in a really good place at that point in time to make sure that it doesn't happen because people who usually do injections and stuff like that, they tend to do multiple over the course of time. And you are limited how many you can do in a given year anyway, based on, the side effects and stuff like that. So get
Sure.
moving, even if you're doing those things.
Exactly. We can always change your position, your load, your frequency, your duration, the activity. We can't change an injection, a surgery, and then we definitely can't change. Oh, well, we can, but it's much more difficult becoming dependent on something like an opioid or other
Mhm.
drug. So, yes, continue to find a way. Joe brought up red flags before. If you missed them, go back and take a little listen to that. Those are going to be the things we really want to rule out. Those are going to be the things that are kind of scary, but short of those things, give it time, give it hope, give it opportunity, and you will see, I think, major, major improvement, particularly in that kind of first 2 to 12 weeks, hopefully, as long as it doesn't shift into some more of a chronic pattern. But again, that would be a slightly different beast.
Mhm. Perfect. All right. Well, that was the 10.
Top
Unless you have
10.
any other thoughts, let's
No,
take it home.
no, Joe, we love you. Listeners, we love you. Thank you again for making the 40th week of my or 40th year of my life an enjoyable one, and I look forward to many, many more. So don't forget to tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Beyond Pain podcast.